G'day! This video tutorial describes the all-new FermWatch32, which has many options and a lot of configuration flexibility. For those that just want to cut to the chase, buy a CYD, get the bin file from the GitHub link below, upload it, configure it, and away you go. And for brewing traditional beers, see my books, link is below. So here are the bits and pieces that you need to make this work. Brewfather, which is an excellent piece of software, well worth the money. You need BrewPiLess, a CYD, and the full details are there. And don't forget that I'm not a programmer. It works with my hardware. It may not work with yours. So you can use it with BrewPiLess standalone, with or without an iSpindel or GravityMon. It's got an improved appearance over version 1.2 with the 8266. It's got a feature for forwarding the BrewPiLess data to another FermWatch32 using a tiny MQTT broker. You can now display just BrewPiLess if you like, and or one or two fermenting Brewfather batches. I've added some stale tests for BrewPiLess, and then there's an automatic reset just before the memory leak reduces the heap, and it retains most of the features from FermWatch 1.2. So what you get is you get the BrewPiLess temperature, room, beer, fridge, etc. You get pressure displayed if the sensor is connected. It'll display the Brewfather original gravity and the estimated recipe final gravity. You can have BrewPiLess or Brewfather, iSpindel or GravityMon displayed. I'll come back to that shortly. You can have your batches displayed with the apparent attenuation, and I've derived the ABV using the UK Tax Office adjustment factors, although there are several different ways you can do that. So the initial setup is using WiFiManager. This is quite simplified now. You need your Wi-Fi, SSID and password. Put in the fixed IP addresses, which I recommend. Put in your Brewfather authorization key. I've improved the way the UTC offset works. It now should be automatically detected using another API. And if you are going to do some forwarding, put in the IP address that you're going to forward to. And then there's a touchscreen configuration menu that you use once. So this is one way of setting it up. So you've got BrewPiLess sending its information to Brewfather, and you've got your iSpindel or GravityMon also sending information to Brewfather. In the middle we've got FermWatch32, which is running tiny MQTT broker. So we've got messages going into the FermWatch. We're then accessing information from the API, again coming back to FermWatch. We're getting batch updates, again all coming into FermWatch. And then there's an important point to remember here. There is a lot of confusion if you configure, say, GravityMon and iSpindel to send to BrewPiLess and to Brewfather. Choose one or the other, otherwise confusion reigns and everybody gets wet. So GravityMon's got quite a lot of features. It can be set up to send to Brewfather. It can be set up to also send to BrewPiLess. You can also send MQTT messages to FermWatch, and I think you might be able to see what's going to happen soon, in that you can get a circular arrangement and FermWatch gets very confused. So you do need to choose which way you're going to configure the system if you're using GravityMon. Now the forwarding arrangements, so you can go from BrewPiLess to FermWatch, and it also can forward to another FermWatch as the target. That other FermWatch, in this case the 1.100, also can receive information from Brewfather. So there's quite a lot of configuration options you can do with this. So you can have one BrewPiLess and two FermWatch32s, but you do need to configure it to configure the second FermWatch32 as a receiver, and you use the touch menu for that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So this is how you set up when you've got one BrewPiLess, one FermWatch, and two batches. It shows which batches are which when you do your batch update, and it identifies down the bottom through the name of the brew. So you have the BrewPiLess screen controlling, say, one fermentation chamber and can have two batches fermenting at a time. Now there are a couple of things to watch out for, because I have found that in playing about with this, some things you can do and some things you can't. So I made this little simple table, and in a couple of instances it doesn't work. So you just need to be aware of that. So file that away for future reference. Now when you've got BrewPiLess only, you've got the ability to have the two screens like that. If you've got GravityMon, again, this might be useful if you were to be using for calibration. For those that need it, it's got Fahrenheit. And we've also got Plato if selected. Now there's an experimental feature with temperature correction to 20 degrees C, which you can set or not. So when you make a reset or power off, you go back through the setup menu. It works for one or two fermenting batches at a time. iSpindel gravity data is only going to be as accurate as your calibration, and your input to Brewfather, GIGO, also affects your readings. Now again, the number of decimal places is not representative of the accuracy of the data. It's more to display incremental changes. No logging functions. Is configured for Brewfather's version 2 REST, which may change and break the system. And it uses the hardware, which is the CYD, as detailed. Now you can, and indeed I did start, using a discrete ESP32 and an ILI 9341 TFT display. As you can see, it's got a lot of wiring, so using a CYD is much preferred if you don't want to be messing around with any wiring. And just to prove it works. So coming up, we've got hardware, construction, the Brewfather setup, the software. I'm not going to talk too much about that. The code is, I think, reasonably well documented, as much for my benefit as anybody else's. The configuration, coding and problems. Now, when I bought the case last year, it was on special, so only $3. And I bought 2 CYDs. So you should be able to get away with something around 12 to 15 Australian dollars. So this is the case construction. Uses a template to define the shape of the fascia. Then with a bit of dremeling, cut it out. Line up the CYD. And then you cut a hole in the fascia. Like so. Mark the holes to fit the CYD. Screw it in. Here's a view from the top. Make sure that the fascia lines up okay. Bit of blue tack, wonderful stuff. Fascia on, peel the paper off, drill a hole for the grommet and the cable, and you're done. So the status of BrewPiLess is displayed using the border color as shown. Now you do need to generate your API key to read the Brewfather batches. Make sure you configure that using the Brewfather software and copy that down. Then you need to encode it. This is an important step because it's not going to work unless you encode it. You can do it at this site here, where it combines your user ID and your API key into a specific base authorization. Now, this may be to state the obvious, but you do need to attach your iSpindel to a batch, and it's not going to work unless the batches are set to fermenting status. And don't forget, GravityMon or iSpindel should only be attached to Brewfather or BrewPiLess, otherwise it's going to cause problems. So Postman is a good way of testing that your authorization works, and you can enter your user ID and API key, and you can inspect your basic authorization on the Postman site. Then you can test out the API using the command there. You press send and you get something that should come back looking something like this. So here's one with fermenting batch data. Now we need to extract the relevant data, and we've got a field called fermentation vessel, FV. FV needs to be configured so that FermWatch knows whether it's batch 1 or batch 2. So you do this by adding a measurement to the fermenting batch as shown, and to automate things further, you set it up in the new batch and you configure that as a custom measurement, and you put in your FV and you set it to status of fermenting, and then when you create a new batch, that'll all be set up for you, but you may need to change the FV number for your batch. So in BrewPiLess, under the MQTT settings, you need your IP address you're going to use for FermWatch, 1883. I didn't set up any username and password. I used a 90-second cycle to push out the data, and that's linked to the stale indications. So if you change that, you would need to change something in the code to suit. The base pass is BPL. That's what BrewPiLess is sending, and that's what FermWatch expects to see. Don't forget to select it, and importantly, don't forget to submit it. So uploading the FermWatch32 bin file, which is in the link below. So I used the Node MCU PyFlasher. Now that the preference data is being used to store setup information, if you put this in a new system, it is much better to wipe all the data beforehand, because that'll clean up any preference data that's lurking. Again, that's from bitter experience. So your initial setup is using WiFiManager, your SSID and password. I would recommend setting up fixed IPs so that, especially if you're using forwarding, to make sure that the thing stays stable if your IP addresses get reallocated by your router. Now, there are occasions where you might need to wipe the settings, and there's a command called wmwipe, and that'll clean out all the settings so that you can reconfigure your Wi-Fi, etc. So you select the options, touch OK to store the options, and then when you've done everything, just press done. Now, the first time through, you'll be presented with a calibration screen, which you just need to click the 2 crosshairs. You should only need to do that once. So let's come back to the options menu. So it's highlighted in yellow if you set it, and it's in grey, although it looks a bit blue on here, if it's unset. So once you've uploaded the bin file, reset it, and then WiFiManager will kick in. The default IP address is 192.168.4.1. If you've got something like an iPad or your phone, you should be able to see the access point crop up called FermWatch32 AP. There's no password, and that should launch the screens. So you've got configure the Wi-Fi, SSID and password, fairly standard. Put in your static IP as required. Put your authorization key in. Now, it is handy that you have your key in your device somewhere that you can copy and paste it straight in, because it's obviously quite a long beast. Put your target IP address in and save, and you're done. So with the coding, the code is on GitHub and the link's down below. Not a programmer. So I posed questions to ChatGPT and it came back with answers in very much programming speak. So some of the fancy bits are from ChatGPT and I don't really know how they work, and I've used them and they seem to work. So I've got Visual Studio Code and Platform IO running that on Windows 10. There's lots of comments in the code and I have done a fair bit of testing. But if you do find something, let me know and I will investigate. But I'm not making any promises because I might not be able to fix it. One of the things I couldn't fix was there's a memory leak in there somewhere. And I don't really know where it is. So I've worked around it. So once the heap has become too fragmented and drops to a certain level, the FW32 will reboot itself. And that's an automatic thing. You'll get a flashing blue light and it'll reboot, and you shouldn't have to intervene at all. It should just come back. Now, most of the problems I've found relate to the authorization key. Just double check that you've entered it correctly. If it didn't work properly, do the wipe command, restart and put it in again. Now I mentioned before the orange border is when BrewPiLess is not sending, or you've got a Wi-Fi connection problem. So it's a stale indication. I have found that sometimes you need to wake up the BrewPiLess to set off the MQTT. The other thing that's helpful when you're diagnosing the MQTT is the MQTT Explorer, which is quite a neat little program, and you can actually see the messages that are being sent. So that's a handy system to use. If you decide to change your fermentation status in Brewfather, FermWatch won't know what's happening, and you'll get null responses like that. There are a lot of CYDs out there. The type I've used is, as I've described, it has 2 USB ports. Brian's site is a very good resource which might help you. And of course, when I'm not gadgeting, I write books. I write books on brewing traditional beers from Australia and a few from the UK. So thanks for watching. Cheers.